mouse over, but the compiler ignores it. The compiler sees it as void because it's typedef to void. So it's purely an Xcode thing to this IB action thing. And then you can see this method has one argument, which is the sender. That's the button sending us this message. And it's going to send this message every time a touch goes up inside the button. Touch up inside, right? That was the event. So that's when it's going to send this message. So that's perfect. That's what we want. So every time this happens, what do we want to do? Well, we want to flip the card over. Okay, so let's start by just flipping it over to the back. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create a local variable called card image. Okay, and you noticed it was trying to help me type there, and you're going to see a lot of helping here. And UI image is another class in iOS, okay, just like UI button is a class. UI image is a class, as you can imagine, stores an image. It could be a JPEG image, could be an animated GIF, it could be a TIFF image, whatever, okay? So it's a very powerful image holding class. And it has a class method called image named, and you give it a string like card front or card back, right? And it will look in the assets library and give you an image of the right resolution, depending on whether it's going to go on. Actually, it'll give you an image with both resolutions, and then depending on where you display it, it will, pick the right resolution, whether it's on Retina or not. So that's cool. We got the image. So now we're just going to tell the button to set this as its background image instead of whatever's on it right now. So to talk to the button, we do open square bracket sender, right? You see that the sender is the button sending us this message, okay? Set, okay, I'm going to start typing set background. And you see as I start to type, Xcode is suggesting to me what I might want. Now it knows that the sender is a UI button, so it's only suggesting button methods here that start with set B, set background color, set background image, and set bounds. Okay? Notice I'm also getting some help at the bottom. See, isn't that cool? Little 1 or 2 lines of help. And I could click on this link and it would take me to the documentation. We're not going to do that for time reasons. But I can also just click one and it picks that one and immediately selects the first argument. So I can type that. Okay? So I'll do that. Card image. And notice here when I type CA, there's a lot of things that start with CA that could go there. But Xcode's pretty smart. It knows that a local variable is much more likely what you want here than all these other CA functions that start with CA. So it automatically selects that for me. And if I hit tab, by the way, it's going to basically escape complete it, tab complete it. And if I hit another tab, it goes over here. This little for state thing is just what I was talking about, where you can set this for the highlighted state or the selected state or disabled state. We're just going to do the normal or default state of this button. Okay, so we're setting the background image for this button. And we also need to set the title because we don't want to see that ace of clubs when we flip it over backwards. So I'm just going to set it to that. Okay, that's the empty string. I could also say nil there. Okay, but I'm saying empty string just to see what an empty string looks like. So actually, if we run this,
If you hit Command 3, it makes it smaller.
Command 3? Okay, let's try that. Oh, ooh, cool. Let's see there. Awesome. So there you go. So there's a miniature version of it. Okay, so here's our card. And if I click on it, oh, yeah, it flips over. Yes, Stanford logo with the tree. Oh, but now if I click, it doesn't do anything else. It always flips over to the back, which is exactly what our code does, right? So that's good. So let's fix it so that it flips both ways. Okay, and I'm going to do that by saying if the, actually I'm going to do one other thing first to make this code a little simpler is instead of having this local variable, I can just take this and pop it right in there. Okay, and that's very common to do that. And if I wanted to wrap it, it'll automatically wrap if I make this too short, but I can also put a return in there. And when I do, look what it does with the colons. See how it lines the colons up? It will always do that. If you press return in the middle of a message send that has multiple arguments, it'll line the colons up for all the arguments. It's really cool. So you can see all the arguments lined up, left and right. So anyway, I'm going to check to see if the current title, okay, that's a button method, if it's a string, if that length, okay, is non-zero, okay, so that's testing there to see if the length is non-zero. That's a cool way to do it because that'll work if the button title is nil or if it's the empty string. Because the button's title starts out nil. If you don't set it to anything, it starts out nil. So here with one line of code, I've checked both the initial state possibly, not in our case because we set the title to be A clubs, but in your case it might be. then we'll set it to one thing, else we'll set it to the other thing. So we just wanted to set this to this, right? So if there's a title on the button, in other words, it has ace of clubs, then we're going to switch over to the back. And if there's no title on the button, then we're going to switch back to the front. Okay, ace of clubs. Okay, so now when we run, our card will flip both ways. Okay, so really simple to wire stuff in your controller to do what you want. The next thing we're going to do is okay, I'll show you really quickly here. If you hold down the Option key, very important key, do you see how it puts a question mark and starts highlighting things? That's going to allow you to transition into the documentation. So if I want to know more about this current title, if I hit Option, click on it, see I get a little bit of help right here. It's a property, it's read-only, it's non-atomic. By the way, if you see retain in the documentation, that's the same as strong. Okay, retain is the same as strong, basically. A little bit of description here, but also hyperlinks. And if I click on one of these hyperlinks, like this one, it takes me into the documentation. This is a separate window right here. And you can navigate around in this documentation. You really want to get familiar with all this. I can't really show it all to you today for time constraints, but you can do things like search, like I could go find UI button here. Okay, here's UI button. I might scroll down and go to, for example, set background image. Here's set background image for state, which we just saw. Maybe I'll click to go UI image, right? You can see all this. There's nice descriptions of the class at the beginning, and then all the methods, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely you want to become a master of that documentation. You can also Option double click on things, and it'll take you straight to the documentation. If you don't want to get the little help one first, you can go straight in. So Option is the key one for that. Let's go ahead. Okay. Notice that this little space along the bottom here appeared when we ran the application. You see that? This is the debugger on the left, and this is the console on the right. Okay? And you are definitely going to be using the debugger and the console both in this class. And actually, I might have time to do quick show you how to do the console. But anyway, you can hide it by dragging it down or also by clicking this thing. Shows and hides it. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a little label on our UI that counts the flips. Okay, it's just a little incremental thing that increments every time there's a flip. And we do that by going back to here and grabbing ourselves a label. So a label is a read-only piece of text, non-editable text. And I'm just going to drag it over here and put it in the lower left. I'm going to double click on it to call it flips. :0. This is what I want it to look like when my UI first launches. Now here, I'm never going to be tapping on this and causing a message to be sent like the button. It's the other way around. My controller wants to talk to this and tell it when the flips changes all the time. Okay? So you might think that you would drag from your code down to this flips, but unfortunately you don't do that. You still hold down Control and drag from here, but instead of dragging it down into your implementation area, you drag it into the interface area, because you're going to create a property that connects to that label, basically. So we do that. We get a thing here. It's asking us a little bit different questions. What's the name of this property? I'm going to call it flips label. Okay. Notice that this property is weak. Okay. When I click connect, it's going to make a property here, and it's going to be weak. This is the first time we've seen weak versus strong. The reason this is weak is because this label is held strongly by the view itself. So we don't need to have a strong pointer to it to keep it in the heap. The view will. And if this label ever leaves the view, it will get cleaned out from the heap, and this property, this pointer to it, will get set to nil, which is exactly what we want. Because if that flips label is not in the view, we don't want to be updating it or sending messages to it. So that's a great use of weak right here. This is normal property that you're used to, except for maybe this IB outlet. That's just like IB action. It's a meaningless thing the compiler ignores that Xcode is using, okay, so that it can do this, show you what it's connected to when you mouse over. Okay? By the way, you can see all the connections by also right-clicking on things. So here I just right-clicked on the button, and you can see its connections. If you ever want to rename, like if I don't like touch card button, I want to rename it to something, you can't just rename it, unfortunately. You have to go in here, right-click, use this little thing to disconnect it, and then control drag again. Okay? Everybody got that? It's unfortunate. It'd be really nice if Xcode could track that for you, but it can't. So if you ever want to rename something, you have to disconnect it here by right-clicking on it, and then control drag a new one and set the name that way. You can also right-click on this little guy, and it'll show you all the connections for your controller. Brings up this window, and I can see the label, you see? I'm mousing over the button, label. There's also this little property here, which is something you haven't seen, which is basically a property that points to the entire view from your controller. So this is the connections to your controller. You see it says card game view controller. Okay, so that's right-clicking here. I'm right-clicking over here. All right, so how are we going to make this flips label work? We are going to put it aside for a second. Let's not think about it. Let's instead do another property, which is non-atomic, which is just going to be an int, which I'm going to call flip count. Okay, so flip count is just an integer that's going to keep the count of flips. And watch this. Make some more space here and over there. I'm just going to go down here and say self.flipCount plus plus. Okay, now does that call the setter or the getter for flip count? Both, exactly. That is calling both the setter and the getter. It's calling the getter to get the flip count, then it's plussing it, and then it's calling the setter to set it back. Okay, so that's kind of a funky line of code right there. That's the same as saying self.flipCount equals self.flipCount plus 1. So it's calling the getter and the setter. Okay, so now we got this nice flip count. It's keeping track of the count. How do we hook that up to this thing over here, which I'm going to make a little bigger, by the way? Okay, how do we hook that up? So that says flips colon 1, flips colon 2, flips colon 3. Well, we're going to do it using the setter for flip count. Okay, so normally the setter for flip count would look like this. Okay, and here's another great use of setters and getters, which is to keep UI in sync with a property. And I'm going to do this by saying self.flipsLabel.text equals, sorry, it's hard to type standing up, equals ns string with format, which you've seen before, flips colon %d self.flipCount. Okay? So now every time flip count is changed, we're going to update the UI. Make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, so let's run. Okay, here's our thing. So click, flips over, flip count updates, flip, 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 back and forth, working, and the flip count is keeping track of how many flips we're doing. Okay? So you can see this stuff is really simple to wire up, okay? And you know, when you get into building even complicated applications, because you're always going to use these same mechanisms of target action and outlets, and you're going to be using setters and getters to keep things in sync, it's going to be easy for people to understand how your code works. They know where to look to see where UI updating happens, etc. I'm going to do one other thing here. Take a minute and show you nslog. Okay, I told you that you could log something to the console. So let's do every time this thing changes. Let's do an nslog. So it's just a C function, and you give it a format string like printf. So I'll say flip count equals %d, self.flipCount. Okay, so you just put that nslog in there, and now when we run, you're going to see that in the console, it's going to come up when I click, and it's going to say what happened here. By the way, of course, I can make that wider, and go back to the simulator, and see all these. Okay, so NSLogging, awesome way to debug. Okay, sometimes a lot easier than setting a breakpoint, and then when you get there looking at the variables and stuff, just print out what's going on and you can watch it. Especially in the UI, things are sometimes animated, they're happening over time. It's sometimes hard to set a breakpoint in the middle of an animation and see what's going on, but if you do some NSLogs, you can kind of see how things progress. All right, the last thing I'm going to show you here is how to add a new class to your app, because you're going to need to do that.